Good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. We're just about to start the final session. I'd like to thank the speakers up to date, and thank you very much. Well, just before I introduce the chairman of the final session, Lord Griffiths, just mentioned the fact that one or two people have been complimentary about my article in the Catholic Herald. I should say an awful lot of the statistics and information in the article were taken from this book, which is an excellent book. It's called The Budapest Report on Christian Persecution. It's a year and a half old, and it is both full of information about the situation that's been described so vividly by Lord Alton and others today, but it's also got a number of important essays on how this has happened and why it's happened. So I strongly recommend that you try to acquire it. I'm sure the Hungarian embassy would be happy to provide it. It's an official document. Maybe I should give my copy to the editor of the Catholic Herald. Having said that, I just remind you that at the end of this session there will be an opportunity to taste some Hungarian wines, and we're grateful to that, courtesy of the embassy and the ambassador. I will now just introduce Lord Griffiths and leave him to introduce the other speakers. But Lord Griffiths, among other distinctions, was my boss for some interesting years when he was the head of the policy unit in 10 Downing Street under Margaret Thatcher. He was a distinguished head of that unit and played a great part in some of the policies that changed Britain. He had a distinguished career before that. He was the professor of global banking at the City University. He later entered the House of Lords. He's active as he was chairman, and perhaps still is an officer of the Christian body for responsibility for Christian responsibility in public life. He's been a director of Goldman Sachs. I think he's still an advisor there, and he has a number of other positions. He's one of the most wide-ranging careers and successes in British public life, and he's always been a consistent advocate in that varied career of the rights of religious people. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Brian Griffiths.
Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, can I say, John called me and said, there's something I really want you to do. I'd worked with him for nearly 5 years in the policy unit, and I'd known him ever since he came to interview me for Irish radio many, many years ago, which is the first radio broadcast I ever did. So I said, John, look, that's a subject I know, it's a very important subject. I know nothing about it. I mean, I read the newspapers and so on, but I'm no authority. There are people in the House of Lords who know far more about it than me, two of whom I see are on the programme today and sitting here. But I don't. So he got quiet, and then he rings again and he says, Brian, I really want you to do this. John, I said, I've looked at my diary. I've already got long-standing engagements I can't get out of in the morning and lunchtime. And it went quiet again. Then third time he rings, I said, I can't take it anymore. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm here because my arm was nearly torn off by John O'Sullivan. Let me say just one thing. I mean, I think throughout the whole of my career, really, I've been trying to relate the Christian faith to our understanding of economic, business, and social issues in various ways. But one thing particularly which John mentioned is an organization the charity I've been chairman of for a long time called Christian Responsibility in Public Affairs. It's very low key, but in connection with the topic of today, the one thing which we did and I did during the latter years of communism and the fall of communism was to be very active in opposing communism and in opposing the persecution under communism. And in that connection, particularly in relation to Estonia, Albania, Romania, what is now North Macedonia, and Hungary itself, where I got on very well with Miklos Nemet. And in fact, my formal visit to Hungary was the only time Mrs. Thatcher ever allowed me out on a formal visit to any country, which brought back for me memories of 1956. I was 15 years of age, or 14 years of age, and I will never forget, on the Sunday morning, lunchtime news on the radio, listening to the sound of Russian tanks and troops moving into Budapest, and I was in tears. So I've always had really a huge regard for Hungary, for the quality of its people, and really for the suffering that they've had. And now the interest you're taking in persecution is really something terrific. But my job is not to speak about myself, it's to introduce the two other distinguished speakers that we have. Our first speaker, and her name is pronounced as HAJNALKA, JUHÁSZ. Yes? And I practiced that a number of times already. She has a very distinguished career, particularly for the youngest woman in the Hungarian parliament. But she's an international lawyer by profession. She was educated in Hungary, but also in the Leicester School of Law. She is the Ministerial Commissioner responsible for humanitarian aid provided by Hungary in the Prime Minister's office. As an MP, she is also Vice Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Assembly of Hungary. She's a member of the Hungarian delegation of the Parliamentary Assembly to the Council of Europe, and she served as a senior political advisor in the Ministry of Justice, among her many other achievements. I'm going to introduce the second speaker next, and then ask HAJNALKA to come and address us. The second speaker on my extreme left is Father Benedict Keeley. He's an Englishman, ordained in Canterbury, in this country, and is a priest in the Diocese of Burlington in Vermont. He's become very active in the cause of today's conference and has visited Iraq on a number of occasions in the last few years. And he's now devoting himself and his Christian calling, vocation, to the whole issue of aid and advocacy for persecuted Christians. He's founded a charity, the Nazarene.org, which is again concerned with advocacy and with aid. So it's my great pleasure to ask, first of all, HAJNALKA JUHÁSZ, right again, to come and speak to us. And the subject is, how are we addressing the problem? Can we do better? How are the churches responding? HAJNALKA, it's over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, the greatest achievement of our Western civilization, democracy, is founded on our shared values of tolerance and individual freedom and freedom of religious belief. Actual harm and destruction faced by Christians living in the Middle East have shown an unprecedented increase in the past 7 years and endangers the very existence of survival of these communities. Religious persecution has been growing in Africa as well as in the Middle East. According to a new report by Open Doors, the targeting of Christians have worsened over the past years, with North Korea continuing to top of the list for overall religious persecution, and in Nigeria ranking first for the number of Christians who have killed for practicing their faith. According to Open Doors, women and girls are on the front line of all instances of religious persecution. In many places in the world, Christian women face double vulnerability. The disadvantage and repression prompted by their gender is overlaid by hostility and persecution that comes from their minority Christian faith. The Middle East continues to be a major hub for religious persecution against Christians. Lord Alton rightly described recent events in Iraq and Syria as a genocide that dare not utter its name. Aggressive attacks and acts of terrorism perpetrated on religious grounds in the Middle East endanger the historical and religious heritage of the world, the cradle of Judaism and Christianity. Here we can quote the Grand Mufti of Lebanese Republic, who recently said, "There is no Middle East without Christians." It is therefore tragedy that the event of the last decade also have forced around 40% of Christians to leave their homeland. Actual harm and destruction faced by Christians living in the Middle East have shown an unprecedented increase, as I mentioned. Since the war in Syria broke out, we can only guess at the number of Christians living in the country. Some estimates say the number is no more than 400,000, down from 1.2 million prior to 2010. Mentioning Syria, 14 centuries of common life between Christians and Muslims is not something to be cast aside lightly. The decrease is even more outstanding in Iraq, where 6% of the population, 1.5 million Christians, used to live in 2003. Today, the number is down to 250,000. In August of 2014, ISIS occupied the Christian villages left unprotected on the Nineveh plains. The houses were ransacked and burned, and most became uninhabitable. Upon their recapture, the buildings suffered further serious damage, and some settlements were leveled to the ground. This is not only an irreplaceable loss to local Christian communities, but will also result in the dissolution of an intellectual and spiritual treasure shared by all mankind. Recognizing the threat to Christian culture as the foundation of all Western civilization, the government of Hungary deems it vital to protect Christian communities across the world and support the families living in those communities. The following two objectives are stipulated in the Hungarian government decision on establishing a state secretariat for the Hungary Health Program and for the aid of persecuted Christians and Hungary Helps Agency. Firstly, direct support to Christian communities suffering from persecution and discrimination in the Middle East and in Africa, in order to allow them to stay if they want. A ground that has been their homeland for centuries and millennia. Secondly, raising political and public awareness of the existence of the spread of the persecution of Christians in the 21st century. Due to the complex nature of religious persecution, particularly in war-torn areas, we have consistently found that conventional humanitarian aid is not always effective in achieving our goals. For one thing, Christians and members of other minority faiths are not generally accepted, for example, in refugee camps. It is therefore an important part of our strategy to identify those local institutions and projects that can have a wider impact beyond just the local Christian or other minority community. Major venues for cooperation is to transmit Christian values in humanitarian practices, support for church-related organizations, and provide space for interreligious encounter. Many church-related organizations carry out projects from which the entire community benefits. Such projects deserve attention and support. The Hungary Helps, which based on the programs proposed by the leaders of the church communities, we have started to provide direct humanitarian aid to the communities in need, using the budget allocated by the Hungarian government. As to our geographical focus, We have concentrated primarily on the Middle East and the Sub-Sahara region, like Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Nigeria. As Leiden in the Hungary Helps initiative establishing contact with the leaders of the church communities suffering for persecution is of primarily importance for the identification of the most critical humanitarian support needs. Their churches and religious leaders are the last stable point for persecuted Christian communities living in insecurity, as they have often lost contact with the central governments. The roots and causes of persecution of religious minorities are diverse, so each case and each region needs to be studied properly. Providing efficient help to the victims of persecution and to endangered communities necessitates close cooperation and consultation with those affected. The aid provided must in turn address the local social reality in the widest possible sense. Our first principle is therefore to engage in consultation with the aim of finding feasible and effective solutions. In practice, this means that we are working in close cooperation with Middle East and North Africa region, with Syrian Orthodox and Catholic Patriarchate of Antioch, Catholic Melkite Church, the Chaldean Catholic Church, and the Assyrian Church of the East, among other and local organizations. Together, we are implementing projects to build and rebuild schools and orphanages and provide support for resettlement programs. I can also mention the work of the Hungarian Interchurch Aid that conduct reconstruction of schools in Iraq, the Jesuit Refugee Service that provides help in the entire Middle East, and Order of Malta, which works mainly in the field of healthcare and social assistance. Hungary has a humanitarian project for the partial reconstruction of homes in Teleszkov in Iraq, a town on the Nineveh Plains that was occupied by the Islamic State in 2014 and damaged by fighting. The houses of about 999 Iraqi Christian families who had left the town were rebuilt. Thanks to the program, 1,000 of the 1,300 families driven away from Teleszkov has returned to their homes. Community facilities such as local kindergarten and church were also reopened with support from Hungary. It might be a particular interest that Alkos in Iraq is in a region where the population of Yazidis is very high. The government of Hungary has provided a project aimed at building a school and a training center in there. The training center is open to all religious communities, including Yazidi minority, who have also suffered gravely. We see that once the damaged building is repaired and the school is completed and equipped, the facility will serve as a hub for the local community. The government of Hungary is estimated to have helped 200 local families as a result of this project also. Once the damaged building is repaired and the school is completed, it really serves a hub for the local community. The government of Hungary is supporting the Open Hospital Syrian Humanitarian initiative established by the Holy See, which has the only received governmental level from Hungary to date, because we agree that communities and families in need should be assisted in their homeland. And with enabling these communities to remain in place and assisting those who have fled to return home. As the name suggests, the hospitals are open for those in need, regardless of the religious background. The goal of the Open Hospitals project is to provide medical care to victims of war and people who have found themselves with no assistance as a result of destruction. The aid covers the operational cost for an entire year for 3 hospitals, 1 in Aleppo and 2 others in Damascus. As the name suggests, the Open Hospitals welcome all those who in need. The reconstruction of the Nineveh plans, a central region of the Christian population in Iraq, remains a focus point of the Hungarian government. Hungary wishes to join the international initiatives that set out to rebuild the economy of northern Nineveh region following the war. We believe it is an urgent priority to establish the necessity framework. I am a firm believer as a politician in the historical significance also of the Visegrad 4 partners with Poland, Czech Republic and Slovakia, especially the great strategic potential for effective collaboration in the area of humanitarian aid. We have set the objective of expanding the Hungary Health Program to the Visegrad 4 Health Program. As an example, we have a common project with Poland to support an orphanage in homes in Syria. We are also proposing an implementation of project following the Polish-Hungarian model in other countries. Further planned project based on cooperation would provide housing and infrastructure reconstruction aid to Christians of the Nineveh plans in northern Iraq. Hungary is more actively involved in international development, humanitarian aid and crisis management efforts than ever before. In 2015, the government of Hungary announced a scholarship program for persecuted and discriminated Christian young people to pursue higher education studies in Hungary. The purpose of this scholarship program is to help young people after their Hungarian studies return to their own communities. Main partners are Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Palestine, Nigeria and Pakistan. Most popular specializations is management and gender IT specialists, social work and healthcare. More than 70 students participated since September 2017 on this starting program, and more than 160 students since September 2018. The purpose of the scholarship program is to help young people after the Hungarian studies to return their own communities. During their stay in Hungary, the students receive pastoral care, which aims to help them in the preservation of their religious identities. Usually, demographic shifts are associated with security threats and pressure on the religious minority population. Sadly and truly exemplify that the persecution of religious minorities in many cases coincides with the necessity to protect women and children, the most vulnerable of the vulnerable. The gap between religious communities with regard to women strengthens the parallel societies, for instance, within Lebanon, as Christians and Muslims break apart more and more. Additionally, with the Islamist turn in Lebanon, both in Shiite and Sunni communities, the condition of women will be more fragile. The law provides limited protection for women. As my position also as a member of the National Assembly of Hungary and a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, I presented a motion, the continuing violence against Christians in the Middle East, because the Council of Europe itself, with 47 member states, has not addressed the persecution of Christians in the past 8 years. It's so surprising. In the motion, I highlighted that the number of attacks on Christian communities rose worldwide, as well as the number of trials and death sentences for blasphemy, which often affect women and children, such as the attacks against Coptic Christians, pilgrims in the vicinity of St. Samuel Monastery in Egypt in 2018. Just mentioning that Coptic Christian traces its origin back to the 1st century, when it was founded by Apostle St. Mark. For this reason, I called a new follow-up report on the current situation of persecuted Christians in the Middle East. The Bureau of the Council of Europe will make a decision in June. The motion presented is also an integral part of these efforts to raise awareness. In the light of this situation, I cannot overstate the importance of the widest possible international support for this initiative, and also stressing the need for international cooperation in the form of coordinated and joint action. Raising awareness of the danger of uprooting religious communities and defining this is irreparable damage to an entire human civilization requires well-organized efforts, both at governmental and non-governmental level. We believe that the Hungarian approach and our efforts are capable to provide support not only to Christian minorities, but also strengthen ties with all local communities. We wish to work with other organizations and faith to achieve our goals. We should lend a voice to Christian communities suffering from persecution. Their fear is well-grounded, considering that being a Christian in the Middle East is a way of life and continuous enactment of 2,000 years of tradition that put great emphasis on religious practice. We believe that these communities can play a key role in restoring peace and harmony to these regions. And finally, I would like to share with you how precious setting an example in humanitarian aid. A Hungarian person called Richard Hardy began his mission to the heart of the Democratic Republic Congo in 1995. Over the past 22 years, the eye doctor has traveled the war-torn region, treating countless patients for a wide variety of conditions. In 2006, he opened an eye clinic in the town of Mujimai, which now employs a team more than 30 people and treats patients arriving from distances of up to 1,000 kilometers. 1% of the population of the Congo is blind, with half of these cases caused by cataracts, which can be treated with a short but highly specialized operation. Hardy potentially has a total of 8 million patients and reaches regions and tribes that have never been visited by a qualified physician in Congo. Due to the intensity of the sun in the region, thousands of people's eyesight is a risk from cataracts, especially focusing on child. A new clinic will be built in the city through funding by the Hungary Health Program. Finally, I would like to quote Mother Teresa. We ourselves feel that what we are doing is just a drop in the ocean. But the ocean would be less because of that missing drop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And now for Benedict Key.
I'm very grateful, as everyone has said, and privileged to be allowed to speak, although I'm not sure if I'm privileged or it's an act of cruelty to be the last speaker of all, because everyone's in a food coma, they're hot, they want their Hungarian food and drink, so I may be cut to that 90 seconds that Fiona Bruce was talking about. Damien Thompson said some very nice things about me earlier on. You have to love Damien Thompson. You never know what he's really thinking. You have to read between the lines, try and get the sense of what he's talking about. Very kind things. I'm only, again, a little cog. It's not false humility. I know I'm just a little tiny cog in this piece, and I'm with giants, as we've already heard, passionate giants who've been working for so long. A brief, tiny little bit of information about why I'm doing this. I was just a parish priest in Vermont, even though I'm an Englishman with an Irish face and an Irish voice. But I remember in August of 2014, when we heard on the news, for the first time in nearly 2,000 years, effectively 2,000 years, for the first time in nearly 2,000 years, there was going to be no mass in Mosul, the city of Mosul, which is, of course, Nineveh. It is Nineveh, where I saw Jonah's tomb last year, stood by the tomb which ISIS blew up. And I remember thinking, just as a parish priest, this is just awful. This is awful. No mass for the first time in 2,000 years in the cradle of Christianity. So to cut a very long story short, I then felt very much called to devote my priesthood to aid and advocacy for the persecuted, particularly in the Middle East. My bishop allowed me he released me in 2016 to do this ministry without a salary. Bishops are like that, they give with one hand and take with the other hand. But I'm very glad to say now the charity is American, but I'm based back in England now. I have an interesting remit, I think, as well, that I'm meant to speak about what the church is doing and are we doing enough, which is rather a great responsibility. Just because I have a little white collar on, I don't really speak for the Catholic Church. It's in a sense personal, but what I would hold to is two quotes really from the Acts of the Apostles. If you remember, when the disciples are told to stop speaking about Jesus, to stop preaching, remember that great phrase, they say, we can't help, we have to say what we have seen and heard. And in a sense, that's the mission of any advocate. You have to say what you've seen and heard. It may not be popular, it certainly may not be politically correct, but you have to tell the truth of what you've seen and heard. So that's the first thing. The second thing would be a great quote again of Cardinal Angelo Scola, the former Archbishop of Milan, who went to Iraq very early on. I went in May of 2015 for the first time when ISIS was about 30 kilometers away from Erbil. And Cardinal Scola went about the same time. And he said, whenever you speak about the persecution, you must have two things in mind. You must speak with complete honesty and absolute transparency. Again, those things are not necessarily popular. It might not be what the establishment like to hear, but that's the truth. Also, as I'm the last speaker, I would like to say a special word to ingratiate myself with the Hungarians, because Hungary is doing a magnificent job. I've been lucky enough to be involved right from the beginning when the Secretariat was set up. I went over. You had a wonderful conference back in a year and a half ago, World Conference on the Persecuted. But the trouble is, you're doing terrible PR because nobody knows what you're doing. I meet, everywhere I go and speak, I say, do you know there's one country in the world that has a government ministry devoted to the persecuted Christians, and nobody knows about it. And then I praise Hungary to the heights. So those of us who are involved in this world think Hungary is doing a magnificent job, and so I'm really, really grateful. Now I get a big glass of Tokai, don't I? But I would also add Archbishop Nicodemus of Mosul, who was denied a visa to come to this country, denied a visa to be at the consecration of the Syriac Orthodox Church. And I asked Archbishop Nicodemus a few months later in Erbil, I said, why did Britain not give you a visa? And Archbishop Nicodemus said, without a second, he said, because I'm not ISIS. But Archbishop Nicodemus, I said I wouldn't be politically correct. Archbishop Nicodemus said to me, the one country in the world where he felt most respected was Hungary. And he said, Prime Minister Orban, who I know is a Calvinist, kissed his hand. And it was a very, very beautiful thing. He wasn't just saying that for the sake of it. So I've really ingratiated myself with Hungary now. Some of you may know Father Douglas Barzi. Father Douglas was, he's now in New Zealand, mainly because he suffered from PTSD. He was kidnapped by Shia militia before ISIS. This again, people forget this has been going on for a very, very long time. He was kidnapped by Shia militia, and for 9 days he was kidnapped, he was tortured. He was, his back, they broke a vertebrae in his back with a hammer. They broke all his teeth. He's a wonderful man, a great man. I met him first in that first visit in 2015, where he was taking care of thousands of people in the camps. Father Douglas said to me something that I've never forgotten. He said, we will not forget those who helped us, but we will also not forget those who have not helped us. And that's a little chilling, but again, I think it's a word of prophecy that we've, in a sense, kind of compasses all that we've been talking about today. Everyone here does care about the persecuted. That's why you're here, and the Lord knows that. But also, he knows those who are not speaking up. Is the church doing enough? The institutional church? I take Kishore's point, not being a Vatican diplomat. There's a lot of undercover work. That's true. We know that. That's very true. But there isn't enough. There isn't enough. What we've seen today from some of our speakers, Lord Alton especially, but all the speakers, is the word passion. Passion. I can speak for the Catholic Church, but is the church in the West passionate about the persecuted? I think that's a rhetorical question. The answer is no. The church is not passionate. There are odd prayers, there are odd statements, once in a while a call to prayer. When the fate of Europe was in great peril, a pope called the whole world to say the rosary. And we know the story, not politically correct, but at the Battle of Lepanto, the fleet was defeated. The church should be calling for worldwide, daily, consistent prayer. Obviously, as a priest, I'm speaking to, in a certain sense, spiritually. Why is prayer not a first priority? People always say, well, if there's nothing left to do, at least we can pray. Prayer is not a last resort. Prayer is a first resort. There should be consistent, constant prayer for the persecuted in our churches regularly. It saved the world before, and it can save the world again, and we should be praying for our persecutors. One of the reasons why our little charity put in New York City last June, we put a shrine, the first shrine in the world, specifically dedicated to prayer for persecuted Christians, with an icon of the Blessed Virgin Mary, painted by an Iraqi Christian who had been driven from the town of Karakosh. He's a refugee in Lebanon, as a place to pray for the persecuted, and for persecuted people to come and pray as well who are in the diaspora. We're going to put another shrine, please God, this September here in London, so it'll be the second shrine at the Ordinariat Church in Golden Square, as a place of specific prayer for the persecuted. For those of us who are believers, we shouldn't have prayer as a last resort. Do you remember in the Acts of the Apostles again, when Peter is arrested and in prison, there's a powerful line in the Acts of the Apostles that says the church was praying constantly for his release. That is something we must be doing. It's something we're not doing. I can report, for example, way back in the end of 2014, I was working quite closely with Aid to the Church in Need in America, and a wonderful bishop in Brooklyn, Maronite bishop, wanted to get the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops to have one night of prayer in the year, just one night, to join together to pray. How hard is that? They didn't want to do it. They turned it down. So there is a problem. There is a problem. When I was in Budapest for the wonderful Congress on the persecuted, I remember Jan Fiegel speaking, the EU Commissioner for Religious Liberty, and these words have been used several times, but he said, ignorance and indifference are allies of evil. Ignorance and indifference are allies of evil. There is much ignorance. Aid to the Church in Need last year in America commissioned a proper poll of US Catholics about their priorities, their order of priorities. You may have heard about it. And tragically, to list their top 5 priorities for the US Church, the care of persecuted Christians came bottom, below global warming. Below global warming. As one of my priest friends said, when you're about to have your head cut off, you don't worry about the air conditioning. You know, the priorities are all wrong. The priorities are wrong, and we can laugh, but it's a scandal. In the true biblical sense of the word, scandalion, it's a scandal that the church is not concerned about this. There is not enough being said, there is not enough being done, not just prayer. Ignorance and indifference. What did the ACN poll reveal? It revealed that there is a need for education, obviously. People need to know, and it's not their fault, because we've talked again all about the media. When I speak in parishes, Catholic parishes, most people say, we don't know about this. We don't hear anything about this. Well, we know why. We've heard about this all day. But also, why don't they hear it from their own pastors, from their own priests, from their bishops? So ignorance and indifference needs education and leadership. The indifference is the one, though, that we have the greatest struggle with, isn't it? Indifference. How can we not care about our persecuted brothers and sisters? It's really a scandal. One of the things that I've been focusing on, which again, the church has been very, very silent about, both in this country and in the USA, is priority for immigration status for victims of genocide. Why would you not give stated victims of genocide priority for immigration? That is, Christians, Yazidis. I was just in Iraq in January again, and you know, it's tragic. The Yazidis, who we hear a lot about Nadia Murad winning the Nobel Prize and everything. but nothing about help for them. Yazidi women are still living in the same conditions in abandoned buildings in Erbil and in the camps that they were in August of 2014. I asked these Yazidi women, what do you want to do? They said, we want to leave. We want to leave Iraq. I said, where do you want to go? Anywhere. Anywhere. Why are we not giving them priority? Why are Christians who want to come to this country in the United States not getting priority? And the church is silent. The church is silent about it. In the US, they're more worried about the border and Mexicans and everything, but not Christians who are being persecuted. There's a great silence. Does that indicate indifference? I have to leave that up to you. We heard about the paradox of persecution. And that is a profound paradox. At the day that Lord Alton was chairing the meeting in Parliament, Patriarch Ignatius Ephraim of the Syriac Orthodox Church was speaking. And he said, of course, there are 4 marks, we believe, Catholics believe, Orthodox believe, 4 marks of the church. Church is one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. But Patriarch Ignatius Ephraim said, there's a 5th mark of the church, and that is persecuted. That's very powerful. There is a paradox of persecution. We're not meant to welcome it. We're not meant to just say sort of bring it on kind of thing. But there is that mystery. And that's what I would call perhaps the great gift. We're thinking a lot today about what we can do for the persecuted. But perhaps my final thought would be what the persecuted can do for us. The persecuted, our brothers and sisters who are dying for the faith or leaving everything. I've spoken to people in Iraq who literally had their wedding rings taken off by ISIS. Everything was stripped from them. They're giving a great gift to us in the West. They're giving us the gift of a living martyrdom, as it were, living witness that Christ is central, that their faith is more important than anything else. Would you give up everything for your faith? Would you lose your home, your family, your children for your faith? This is a gift. The paradox of persecution is that the gift the persecuted give us is a strengthening of our faith. And if we claim to be Christian, but do not have passion for the persecuted, we should not use the name of Christian. Thank you.
Gentleman at the back.
My name is Andy Darmo. I'm a Syrian from Iraq. I represent the charity Assyro, a Syrian Church of the East Relief Organization. Our Holy Father established this organization 10 years ago, knowing what was going on in Iraq. Assyrians are the original people of Iraq. We are the indigenous people of Iraq. Today, we're living around the world as refugees. Now, my question is, the Honorable, the great Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, has started an enormous project for helping Christians in their own land. His ambassador visited our schools, our churches in Erbil in northern Iraq. It was followed by the foreign minister of Hungary. And then they were invited to Budapest, as the Honorable Lady would confirm. Chaldean church leaders were invited, Syriac church leaders were invited, and Assyrian church leaders were invited. My bishop yesterday sent me this photo. He said, please tell the Honorable Lady and His Excellency and all the ladies, honorable ladies and gentlemen sitting here, thank them from the bottom of our heart. They have found now a system where people can stay in their homeland, not to go on seas, not to catch boats, and it's another initiative we have to think also, of course, Vice President Mike Pence, who started the same project in IDC, in defense of Christians. My question is, we have so many distinguished professors, honorable ladies, gentlemen, lords, and my favorite, John O'Sullivan, who used to be with Margaret Thatcher's, my greatest lady, great Margaret Thatcher. I wish she was with us today. She would have had something to say about what is going on in the Middle East. Can we build on Viktor Orban's initiative in helping Christians in their homeland? Thank you very much indeed.
Why don't you say this? Would you like to comment?
Well, yes, I've already said how wonderful the work of Hungary is, and again, I would have a sort of spiritual view of this. I think it's very powerful to see the people who suffered so much under the evil of communism, these countries like Hungary and Poland and Slovakia and the Czech Republic, responding so powerfully because you had the hand of evil upon you for so long. And so there's something very deep and powerful about that you're reaching out to help, which is another reason perhaps why the EU bureaucrats also hate you, but that's another story. The US aid is, well, one of the things I would say is, when you go to places like Iraq, I haven't yet been to Syria, I'm praying to go, but when you go to Iraq, you realize things are very, very complicated. And sometimes the aid is not getting to the right places, people are struggling. One of the most important things is to listen to what the local people say, what the people on the ground say, the priests, the parish priests, and who are the closest to the people. Where's the aid needed the most? I've seen the good work you've done in Telescoff, and it is greatly appreciated, I know, but there's a lot more to do. US aid is trickling through. It's not yet where it needs to be. British aid, I'm sorry to say, I haven't seen, in 4 years I haven't seen any visible British aid. It may be there, but the aid of the church has been constant again and consistent from the beginning. It was the church, ACN, Caritas, all these other organizations were feeding and housing when no one else was, especially not the UN.
Would you like to say how you think that others, the rest of us, other countries and so on, could do more following the model that you've established?
I think first of all, which we think it out, that we do not want to be clever than those persecuted communities living in their area. So the first step always to ask them what is necessary and what is the most important humanitarian aid we can give them, because it's differences, as I mentioned in my speech, what's going on in Egypt, Syria, Iraq. So the multilateral, as an international lawyer, I also see that multilateral organizations, it's sometimes questionable the efficiency of them because they do not ask what you are needed for. And I think this is the first step we really need to understand. And this is a mission for us. And we are proud of that we have a 1,000 year of traditions of Christianity. And to be the first is always very, very difficult, but we are really hoping that we will have alliances in this path. And I definitely believe that those who are really committed and interested in humanitarian aid in the Middle East really understand that it is a real tragic when, you know, the Middle East will change forever, because when the Middle East, the religious communities, few of them diminishing and other one remains, will have not just effect on Europe, but for the whole world. So it's, yes, you can trust.
Thank you very much indeed. Who else? Gentleman at the back there, hand up.
Hello, my name's Christopher Seeger, and I work for the Foundation for Relief and Reconciliation in the Middle East. We finance St. George's Church in Baghdad, and we also work a lot with IDPs in northern Iraq and with refugees in Jordan. And I just want to make 2 points, particularly towards Madame JUHÁSZ, about the work of Hungary Helps. First of all, you may feel that you don't get much publicity here, but I can tell you from having visited the plain of Nineveh several times in the last 18 months that you are very well known there, and partly because I recognize the logo that is behind you. That logo is extremely important for 2 reasons. One is that when you put it on a building which you have restored, it shows everyone in the community that somebody is there to help them. It also shows the people who would like to move into some of these towns and villages and displace the Christians, that there are people, governments in the West, who care about what is happening. And that is increasingly important. USAID are now rebuilding some of the schools in Teleskov, and they've made a particular point of putting a very large sign on the schools that they have rebuilt to show everyone that USA is now there. And I think that's quite important. The second point I'd like to make is that we have tried for a year to persuade both our own government and the US AID that it's the most practical solution to finance restoration work directly through the local churches. We still find this is difficult because that cuts across the conventional rules of distributing aid for reconstruction. But we are suggesting that if they can't work directly with the churches, they should work through us, and we will consult the churches as to what they need. We haven't won that battle yet, but we are fighting it.
Just an added information that in 2008, in December, we signed a memorandum of understanding with the USAID, so changing best practices in Northern Iraq. So, and we have also an excellent discussion in New York 1 month ago with Senator Sam Brownback. We have a round table together. So exchanging practices, I think, is highly, highly important.
Thank you. My name is Jack Thorpe Baker. I run a film production company focused in particular on biblical storytelling. In response to what I thought was a really insightful observation, that there is a lack, perhaps at the grassroots level, of motivation to involve themselves in volunteering to help those in need abroad. Could you perhaps use your extended knowledge to define certain communities that you think specifically are either most in need or most accessible, especially uniquely from a British point of view, that people can individually and at grassroots level, through volunteerism and through their local communities, actually involve themselves in helping?
I can give you ideas that, especially in the Nineveh plans in northern Iraq, there are orphanages. And usually we feel that it does not matter which country we are in the Middle East, especially focusing on children. And I just give you an idea that several orphanages over there, and give you one of my experience which really affects me, that when we went there, we were so surprised at how poor conditions they are living. Their mother, father were being killed, and they suggested me that they are praying for us. And we just asked them why. And 6 and 10 years old children told me that their religious belief is so strong, but they are just follow up that what's going on in Europe. And they praying for us because Europe has started to lose its identity. So I can give you some ideas where to go, especially focusing on orphanages, because they are very, very difficult condition. But you need your strong belief and strong heart to go there.
Last question.
Thank you. I wonder if you could give us some insight into why governments haven't been persuaded by the political or geopolitical arguments that the eradication or the extinction of Christians in the region would lead to a complete destabilization of the region. So, in other words, even if people don't care about the persecuted Christians, even if on a personal level they care more about global warming, why haven't governments and people been persuaded by the geopolitical consequence of the eradication of Christians in the region?
We can share. I just want to mention, Ingi, that Saint John Paul II, 2 years before his death, he started to communicate again that the whole Europe needs a Christian constitution, and it was failed since then. And we definitely see that Christian culture and Christian identity is not strong in Europe. So that's why I definitely believe that as a politician we have a role to raising public and political awareness, and not too many politicians would like to play this role. But in my generation, hopefully more and more politicians would like to discuss this issue. And I definitely believe we met several times, the latest in Vienna. And I can share with you our common experience that after my lecture, a crying woman came to me, and she was the Yazidi minority, and she told me that the Hungarian government is the only government who assisted in Iraq to Yazidi minorities. So a lot to do, but we definitely need to believe that we will have alliances. And I also mentioned Visegrad for the Czech Republic, Slovakia and Poland. We are discussing how to cooperate on northern Iraq. Thank you.
Melissa O'Sullivan is the best timekeeper I've ever met in my life. So I know I have 1 minute. She's doing a wind up. Really, I've never been at a conference which actually finishes on time. This is incredible. So I have 1 minute. Ellen, I can't personally answer that question. I think everybody, all that was said today, in a sense, answers that. I would just like to respond to the gentleman before as well. Obviously, as I said, prayer. You can pray. I would give a little plug, teeny weeny plug for my charity. Small is Beautiful. We haven't actually started it yet in the UK, so you can't give me any checks, which I'm looking forward to. But one of our things we're trying to do, which is also what Hungary Helps is doing, is, of course, helping people to stay. People will not stay without two things: security and jobs. Now, in a sense, we can't do very much about security, and the security situation, by the way, in the Nineveh plain is very bad. Don't believe again what the press is telling you. It's very, very serious, with the Shia militias now surrounding Christian towns. But microfinancing, helping a family start a little business. You can start a little mini microfinancing business. You could do a startup in Iraq for about $5,000 or £3,000 or £4,000. For example, I'll give you one example. It's a beautiful story in Bartella, which is an ancient Christian town now surrounded by Shia, a Shabak militia. There's a little man and his wife and their severely epileptic son. They live in one room, so poor. He had a taxi business. His taxi was so old and so bad that it had no air conditioning. You know, imagine in 110, 20 degrees in Iraq in the summer. So mini microfinancing, $5,000, we bought him a new taxi. I saw the pictures the other day. You've never seen someone look more happy and pleased. That man's going to stay now and help his son grow up and his wife. So these little tiny things, those are practical things you can adopt. Small is beautiful. If you see people's faces and you can identify with them, then you can help them and you can pray for them. So those two things go together.
Just one sentence, and I promise I finish that. I see that terrorist groups has a very, very strong vision how they would like to ruin us. Boko Haram, Shalabab, Islamic State. And that's why we need to be very determined and have a vision not to being ruined by them. Thank you very much indeed.
Ladies and gentlemen, that we could have a long discussion, conversation here. There's so much, I'm afraid, that could be said. But the strong arm of the Sullivan family, it's not just John. He's now joined by his wife. So I have to capitulate. But in proposing a vote of thanks, can I say two things? Firstly, huge thanks to our two speakers. It was very powerful. There were so many practical examples and also so many biblical injunctions intertwined with them. So it came across, if I may say so, very effectively. And secondly, to His Excellency the Ambassador, one thing which has come out of this session has been the enormous contribution which the Hungarian government is making. And although Mr. Orban in London and New York sometimes has a very bad press, what we've heard today should really be an inspiration to any country which has a Christian heritage. And I think you deserve enormous thanks and congratulations for what you are doing. So thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I can't talk for long, obviously. So just three very quick points. First of all, from the thrilling speech by David Alton at the beginning, right up to this extraordinarily fascinating panel, I think this has been a conference that at every moment has held our attention in a way that's not usual. Thank you very much to all of the speakers. Secondly, the audience too. We've heard from the questions that there are people in the audience who could have replaced the panel if necessary, and some of them hadn't turned up. It's very rewarding for us to find we've attracted people who know about this and care about it and want to do something. And then finally, a cautionary note. Today has been a sowing of seeds, but whether we do it by the high road of prayer or the low road of political organisation and pressure on governments, we have to go beyond the sowing of seeds so that they blossom into plants, flowers, shrubs, trees, and, oh yes, vines. Let me now invite you to enjoy the hospitality of the Hungarian government and ambassador and some delicious wines. Thank you very much indeed.